Ron Frankel, the founder and creative director of Proof Inc., a previs and postvis visualization company, as I refer to it now, based in Los Angeles. We also have offices in London, Sydney, and now Vancouver. So this past year has been a great year for us. We spent about 18 months on Guardians of the Galaxy, which was obviously a huge hit and a great project for us. We followed that up with work for about 20 months on Furious 7. And then we also recently wrapped production on Pan and Tarzan for Warner Brothers. There are quite a few more. We did Frankenstein for Fox. We did some work on Kingsman also for Fox. Yeah, it's been a fun year. The big projects now have kind of a lifespan that goes from the early days of kind of development all the way through the end of post. And that's been a big change for us. It used to be that we would start with previs, and sometimes we would come back for postvis, sometimes we wouldn't. Now we're really kind of on these big projects we're staying on all the way through production. So the early days of pre-production are really spent with story development, basic action scene development, the kind of the basics of previs, helping the filmmaker figure out what it is that they want to do, what they're trying to accomplish, how to accomplish it. Once they get into production, we begin to focus more on some of the nuts and bolts, day-to-day stuff, staying a few days ahead of what production is doing and feeding them information that will help them on set. Camera positions, lenses, re-engineering some shots based on some new constraints that they might have come across, a change of location, a change of set. And then as soon as principal photography starts to roll, we go right into postvis. And as soon as those kind of first dailies are coming out of editorial, they're throwing them to our postvis team, and we're beginning to do temp comps that can go back to the editor so they can start cutting the film together. So the entire schedule has become very compressed in that respect. And the postvis stays on all the way through, usually definitely through the director's cut, and oftentimes well past the director's cut as they begin to do test screenings, so that they're using the postvis as a way to basically design the visual effects sequences before they get farmed out to the final visual effects vendors. So it ends up being a really kind of easy, collaborative, iterative way for them to play around with ideas in editorial before they've actually committed to which shots are going to be in the film, which shots aren't going to be in the film. They can screen them, they can test them, see what's working, and then once all that's done and they've committed to those shots and they package that up for the vendor, our work is actually part of that package. So we're packaging up our Maya scenes, we're packaging up all of our comps, and sending all of that off to the vendor so that they actually have a jumping off point for their work. So postvis, when we started doing postvis years ago, the idea of postvis was it was really we call it a slap comp. It was rough. It was never meant to stand up as film quality anything. It was just meant to really convey the roughest, broadest strokes of an idea of what was going to be in the shot. Now, on a lot of the projects, the high-end postvis is actually almost a first animation pass of what is going to be in the movie. So if you look at the comparison between our postvis and the final shot, the difference is quality. But it really is just quality. That in a case like Guardians of the Galaxy, Groot, Rocket, those are two full CG characters. The final vendor is bringing those characters to life, doing all the kind of nuanced facial animation and nuanced character animation, and obviously the beauty rendering. But if you compare it to the postvis, where the character is in frame, how they're moving, how quickly they're moving, all of that is actually being established in the postvis prior to it being shipped off to the vendor. I guess the biggest challenges for us on these films, on the previs front, that's really been our bread and butter for decades now. I mean, Proof has been around for 13 years, and we really kind of know and understand. So the biggest challenges on the previs front are always the same. It's about creative communication. It's about how to connect with the director, how to really kind of plug into what their vision is and figure out kind of the shortest way to get that onto the screen in a way that is meaningful and compelling. And that never changes. That'll never get any easier or frankly any harder than what it already is, which is how do you communicate with someone and how do you understand kind of the pictures that they're seeing in their head and how do you get those onto a screen so that everyone else can understand what's going on. The biggest challenges we've faced recently, especially with postvis, is really having to step up that quality bar. So rather than having, a postvis team used to be comprised of previs generalists who knew After Effects, and they could kind of, do some comps in After Effects. Our postvis teams are now comprised of nuke compositors, And it's really essentially a professional compositing team that has been trained to kind of work commando style, super fast, focused in on what really matters in the shot, and retooling our entire pipeline to cater towards people who are professional compositors. So there's a lot more specialization going on in postvis. It's no longer the world of a previs generalist. Now we have tracking specialists, roto specialists, comp specialists, look and lighting specialists, because it's the only way we can achieve that quality on the time frame that the productions are looking for. So in terms of tools, years ago we switched over to Maya when that really became the kind of de facto industry standard for visual effects, that we could exchange data more easily with all the final visual effects vendors. So previs is still fully within the Maya world. Our postvis, we transitioned over to a Nuke pipeline, again, for the same reason. We want to be able to exchange data with the final visual effects vendors. We don't want our work to simply be visual reference for them. We actually want to give them scene files and Nuke scripts that they can load up and use if they can. One of the big changes tool-wise that we've implemented over the last couple of years is, a few years ago I started looking at previs and looking at this kind of race towards the kind of game quality, game cinematic, photoreal, fully colored, fully textured previs. And I kind of asked myself a simple question, which was why? Why are we trying to emulate a photorealistic look in the previs when all these films are going to be shot live action anyway, and then they'll be finished in a photoreal look by the final vendors? What value are we as a previs company getting out of trying to kind of achieve a photoreal-ish look? And our work was never photoreal, but it always aspired to that kind of full color, full texture. So we started looking into kind of going the opposite direction. So with our previs, we wrote a proprietary real-time CG effect shader that we call the Toon Shader, that allows us to give our previs a kind of more illustrative, almost a more hand-drawn look. It's still the same previs in the sense that it's full 3D models, full 3D environment, lens accurate, dimensionally accurate. None of the kind of underlying foundation of it changed, but just the skinning of it, the surfacing of it has changed. It's still real-time, it's still very quick and iterative, but it gives it a much more kind of, almost hand-drawn, flat, toon-shaded, illustrative look. And it's been really interesting to see how clients have responded to that, because one of the things that was happening in previs is that we were spending a lot of time trying to kind of detail out every surface. Is that a brick wall? Is that a plaster wall? Is it a wood floor? Is it a marble floor? Is it limestone? Is it shiny? Is it matte? Like all these questions that frankly, weren't really relevant to the action at hand, because, whatever they were chasing, they were running, they were gunning. The surface of the floor was really kind of irrelevant to the action. And frankly, the art department hadn't even gotten to that set yet. So they hadn't made those decisions. So suddenly we were asking questions that were kind of way far down the road for anyone to consider. But in order for us to do our work, we kind of needed to know and needed to make a decision. And suddenly I felt like we were getting way ahead of the process, that we were starting to kind of dictate decisions about the look of certain environments when no one had really even considered it, and we were weeks or months away from ever having to consider it. So we decided to basically kind of roll back the detail and create this, again, this more illustrated look to the previs that frankly is really compelling and really interesting, because it dials back all of the kind of superfluous detail in the surfaces and the environments and really focuses your eye on what's important, which is the composition, the pacing, the action. So in an ironic way, it kind of goes all the way back to the earliest days of previs before we could do any of those things. When we didn't have the firepower and the workstations to do all of the textures and the high-res models. So in a funny way, we've kind of gone all the way back to the beginning and done this very interesting kind of full circle back to some really basic looking previs. And we used it on Guardians, we used it on Captain America, we're using it frankly on almost every single show that we're doing now, because it really allows the filmmakers it draws their attention and focuses them on kind of the heart of what we're supposed to be doing in previs, which is really kind of designing action sequences, making sure the sequence works. Does the pacing work? Does the composition work? Does the blocking work? We shouldn't be all that concerned in previs with lighting. We shouldn't be all that concerned in previs with mood. I mean, we want to capture a little bit of mood, but ultimately that is the domain of the DP and the production designer. And if we're working, way in advance of them, it's not really appropriate for us to start making decisions about lighting and look, before they've had a chance to really weigh in and make those decisions. So if they've made them, we can incorporate that into what we're doing, but we don't have to. There's a way in which, as a previs artist, as the kind of the previs company that's been engaged to work on these films, I feel we have a certain responsibility to make sure that the creatives, the filmmakers, the studio executives, everyone is really looking, at what we are able to contribute to the process, and not getting distracted by, decisions that need to be made further down the road. So, we always try to be kind of a constructive part of the creative process, and I take a lot of pride and put a lot of effort into thinking about ways in which we can contribute to the creative process and that dialogue. I mean, all these films, there is an elaborate process that goes into the decision making that ultimately ends up on screen. And I feel that our job is really to go in there and figure out what's the best way that we can contribute to that decision-making process, and how can we help kind of accelerate it and keep it moving forward, and not distract people with the kind of irrelevant details that don't need to be there at that moment.